All right. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Kenzie.
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Great, fantastic. All right. We're gonna get going. Got a long and busy day. Superintendent, is your whole team here?
I can't see them all through the screen, but I'm pretty sure they are.
All right, I see Charlene, I see Nate, David,
Good morning, everyone.
and Mary. That's who I've got. Yep, looks like everybody on the list.
Great.
All right, great. Let's okay. All right. I'm calling this meeting of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the District 8 City Councilor and also the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will be rebroadcast on Comcast Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Verizon Channel 1964. Our budget review process encompasses about 27 hearings over roughly 6 weeks. We're in the final week of those initial hearings now. And we strongly encourage residents to take a moment to engage in this process by giving testimony for the record. There are a number of ways you can do that. One is to come to a hearing like this one. On the public notice, there's a Zoom link, and you can come and wait in the waiting room and then testify at the end of the hearing. You can also come to one of our 2 remaining hearings dedicated to public testimony. One will be tonight at 6 p.m. We'll have a public testimony hearing that's focused on BPS. So if you have public testimony focused on BPS and you'd like to come give it and you don't want to have to wait through one of these hearings, we'd love to have you at 6 tonight, where we'll go straight to public testimony. You can also testify on any other city department at 6 p.m. on Thursday, May 28th. Or you can email your testimony to ccc.wm@boston.gov or fill out the form on our website at boston.gov/council-FY21Budget. There's also a way there to submit a 2-minute video of yourself, which we can then append to a hearing video, or you can informally tweet us your questions using the hashtag BOSSBudget, BOS budget, on Twitter. Today's hearing is on dockets 0588 to 0590, orders for the FY21 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations for the school department and for other post-employment benefits. Docket 0591 to 0592, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations. Docket 0593 to 0596, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. Collectively, that set of dockets makes up the mayor's proposed budget for FY21. Our hearing this morning will also be considering docket 0612, order authorizing the city of Boston to enter into a memorandum of understanding with certain entities for the purpose of reporting costs and receiving Title 4-E Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, allowable federal reimbursement for said costs as they relate to transporting eligible children from foster placements and schools of origin. So our focus areas this morning will be, we've been organizing these hearings based on the superintendent's new BPS strategic plan. So this morning's will be focused on the final 2 commitments, BPS Commitment 5, Cultivate Trust, and BPS Commitment 6, Activate Partnerships. Focused on the admin budget and central office, leaves of absence, workers' comp, teacher retention, BPS transportation, school safety, food and nutrition services, athletics, graduation and career readiness, and credit recovery, age 22 plus. Those are some of the topics that the council is particularly interested in that kind of fall under those headings. There'll be other topics that the school department discusses under those headings. I want to note for folks that we're focusing on a few more of these topics, specifically the commitment 6 ones this morning, as opposed to our original plan, so that we can really devote our attention in the afternoon 1 p.m. hearing to the sort of post-COVID reality for our schools. So this afternoon's hearing will be focused on questions about what the summer is going to look like, what the fall is going to look like, and we're looking forward to hearing from BPS on that. So we've shifted those COVID questions very much to the afternoon 1 p.m. hearing. And I'd ask colleagues to focus on questions related to commitments 5 and 6 this morning. So that's a little bit about our topics today. And then we're joined by Superintendent Brenda Caselius, by her CFO, Nate Cooter, David Bloom, the Deputy Chief Financial Officer, Charlene Briner, the Interim Chief of Staff, and Mary Dillman, the Executive Director for the Office of Data and Accountability. I'm also delighted to be joined by my colleagues, Councillor Michael Flaherty at large, Councillor Andrea Campbell, District 4, Councillor Anissa Sabi George at large, Councillor Ed Flynn, District 2, Councillor Liz Breeden, District 9, Councillor Michelle Wu at large, and Councillor Julia Mejia at large. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to the superintendent. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thanks all the members for being here, all the counselors and my staff. It's a really great honor to be here to be presenting the budget. Again, I think this is our 7th budget hearing today. And again, like you said, we are focusing on cultivating trust and activating partnerships. Also having to share with you a little bit more about some of our reopening guidance and framework for what we will be considering and what some of the different contingency plans will be needing to take for that. So with no further ado and to save time, I will let Mr. Bloom start us off today, and then we'll be anxiously awaiting your questions afterward. Thanks.
Thank you, Superintendent, and good afternoon, City Councilors, members of the BPS community, and members of our broader Boston community. Thank you for joining us today. As mentioned earlier, joining the Superintendent and I today is Nathan Cooter, our Chief Financial Officer. We're focusing today's discussion on our last 2 remaining strategic plan commitments, Commitment 5, Cultivating Trust, and Commitment 6, Activating Partnerships. Just confirming that screen is actually shared. Sorry about that. Great. So this is the 7th of our 8 or so hearings on our 1.26 billion FY21 budget. And I'm going to focus on 3 key points to highlight what we're discussing today. First is that we've received an unprecedented investment for FY21 and a commitment to not only sustain that investment, but expand it over the next 3 years. As the city and the district are responding to the disruptions of COVID-19, we're evaluating both our current and future year budgets to create flexibility to respond to evolving realities. You'll hear more about that in this afternoon's hearing and to best meet the needs of students. Having said that, the priorities established in our FY21 budget as approved by school committee are just as relevant today as they were 2 months ago because we have aligned our budget to support our highest need students and invest in transformation of our lowest performing schools. We started our budget process rooted in this statement from the Opportunity Achievement Gap Policy. We recognize the need to redouble our efforts to close the opportunity gaps and guarantee an excellent education for all students. By focusing on those students who need public education the most and providing intensive support to those schools that are struggling to improve, we can ensure that all students have the same opportunity to achieve greatness. At our first hearing, Nate talked about the instructional core, the interaction between students, teachers, and content. Our budget is designed around the straightforward premise that there are these 3 ways to increase student learning. 1, increasing the knowledge and skill of our teachers. 2, updating and having the latest content. And 3, fundamentally altering the relationship of the student and content and the teacher. 100% of the funding directed to impacting is directed to impacting the student experience through the instructional core. 9 million to support students and families, 12 million to instructional quality, and 15 million to high quality learning materials and resources. Our FY21 budget proposed the $80 million increase for BPS. Of this, 36 million is new investments directly in schools, The remaining $44 million represents the increased costs of operations and of implementing salary and benefits of the new Boston Teachers Union contract. Here's the really exciting part of this. It's not just a single year commitment. It's a 3-year, $100 million investment in Boston and Boston Public Schools. This not only represents an unprecedented investment in terms of the size of investment, but a multi-year commitment to additional resources that gives us an opportunity to do really long-range planning and strategic execution. That strategy has been driven by a long and labor-intensive on the superintendent's part commitment to really listening to the voices of our whole community across Boston. As you can see outlined on this slide, all of that listening has fed into our strategic plan, which is then influencing our first year operational plan, which also obviously influences our FY21 budget. Our city council hearings are aligned to that strategic plan. Today we're focusing, as you can see in bold, on commitments 5 and 6. Our strategic plan has 6 main components, each of which might have up to 11 priorities. So we're excited this morning to be wrapping up that focus on the strategic plan with commitments 5 and 6. Those commitments, as well as the others we've already discussed, roll into our operational plan, which is our commitment to what we're doing next year to really focus on implementing those commitments outlined in the strategic plan. So as we dive in today, we'll start with commitment 5, cultivating trust. And the items are bolded here. One of our first commitments in building trust is really thinking about how to ensure that our central office is a child and family friendly service provider. And we have 4 key priorities there. First, improve communication. Second, working to expand our hub school model so families are able to get more of their services directly at the schools that they know and love. Third, a focus on improving the quality of services through BPS transportation. And finally, a real focus on accountability for our central office to our customers, our students and families. As we think about our schools as the hub of learning and support, it's important that we hold school leaders accountable for meeting that vision through inclusive, CLSP-aligned practices. We also know that one of the challenges that BPS is facing is staff turnover. Our focus is on making BPS a place where educators and staff want to be employed, that will allow for a consistency of practice that will improve the quality of our services. As we think about what central office does, one of the key things we do is feed all of our students. Our mission is to offer all Boston Public Schools students safe, wholesome, nutritious, and enjoyable meals to fuel academic excellence. We envision Boston Public Schools settings where students naturally enjoy eating healthy foods, therefore becoming better prepared for academic learning and living. This work to really revamp our operations also includes a focus on working with minority, women-owned, local-owned, and/or veteran-owned businesses. Our transportation department is another key method of our operations, right? Our students, making sure our students are getting to school safely and on time. This year's budget is doubling down on 2 new investments to help really ensure that our families are having the best possible experience with our transportation department. First, a new onboard navigation system, ensuring that our buses are taking the best possible routes and are getting to their stops and schools on time. And second, a ticketing system to allow for better communication with families when anything is being adjusted or changed, along with our continued commitment to reducing emissions through our switch to propane buses. Another key touch point we have with families is our registration and assignment process. Over the last few years, we've made a number of investments to improve the registration and assignment experience. This includes implementing appointment and queuing systems to create time efficiencies for families, providing staff and centers to help navigate the school choice process, particularly for families needing more support. This year, we're also made an investment in ensuring that Welcome Centers provide an inviting environment for families, warm and calming paint colors, comfortable seating, kid areas, student art, translated internal and external signage, and better technology. We also piloted summer registration at faith-based and community-based sites, as well as hosted what has historically been called registration pop-ups during the year. We'll increase those efforts for the next school year and start doing regional registration through family liaisons across the 33 transformation schools. The final key part of building trust is a commitment to transparency and accountability. The tools that are being mentioned here will really help us track our work across the 6 commitments and ensure that central office is really held accountable to the commitments we are making over the course of these hearings. As we then shift into the work that we are not doing alone, we have a commitment to activate the wonderful partnerships that we have opportunities to join throughout the city. Now more than ever, high quality out of school time is a critical focus area for BPS. We are proud of our work building partnerbps.org to document our work with partners and with our commitment to a robust learning experience, both through BPS run academic programs outside of school time, but also with our 5th quarter partners. We have more than 200 total partners who provide a variety of services to students. We provide support, as you can see here, to 18 partners, providing social emotional supports in specific and skill development to 11,000 students over 49 schools for FY20. We project this to be very similar. This does not include a number of our partners who work with us at no cost to provide those additional supports to students and families. We're continuing to invest in the Becoming a Man program and PIC to support social, emotional, and professional skill development. One of the key things as we think about supporting college and career readiness for our students and families is eliminating barriers to participation. Thinking about what is it that stops students from taking part in AP courses, applying to college, and having a real strong career access. We are thinking about this work as in part having quality partnerships across several sectors, higher education, the business community, and philanthropy, to make sure that our coursework is aligned to the work experiences and degree attainment that our students are aiming for. As we continue to champion college and career awareness, we're continuing to expand our investment in Navient as a framework for college access and work on building pathways to college and career opportunities through our CBTE office. BPS wishes to be more proactive as we're talking about pushing information out to partners and coordinating the dissemination of information from multiple departments for more cohesive messaging, encouraging more communication, feedback, and coherence for partners. We wish to provide smaller, more focused events for partner organizations to provide feedback to BPS staff and leadership around a specific partner focus, for instance, summer partners or social emotional programs. We're also working to provide additional support to smaller, non-English based organizations and solicit their feedback on how to streamline partner registration and evaluation. BPS Partnership Office is working to create an evaluation metric for all BPS partners we can build into contracts starting in the spring of 2021. This evaluation will allow BPS to show the educational, emotional, and financial benefit of partners and allow partners to show their return on investment to their own funders. BPS Early Education is providing services to almost 800 students this summer, up an increase from last year's 300. But we're also working with Build to explore the classroom without walls concept and encourage partners to work together to provide programming at multiple locations. We're hopeful to have an asset map on time for September with the expansion of our hub school model to really be able to think about the year-round partnership opportunities that could be available. As you look at this budget, we're really proud of our transparency with what's available online. There are a number of ways you can engage with the budget documents that have been published over the course of these hearings, including going to www.bostonpublicschools.org/budget. And our final budget hearing that we are presenting at is this afternoon on COVID response, but we're also looking forward to hearing testimonies from members of the public this evening at 6 o'clock. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Great, thank you so much. All right, we'll jump right into questions. As has been our practice, I'll be giving people 5 minutes with a little grace period, and I'll just remind everybody to, when you hear the bell, try to finish your thought and stop, and look out for my gavel. And I'll also just remind everybody again, I know this was clear in David's presentation and I said it at the top, but we're addressing both commitment 5 and 6 this morning. So please feel free to ask your questions related to any of that set of categories. Up first, I'll defer mine to the end. So it'll be Councillor Flaherty, and then it'll be Councillor Campbell, and then Councillor Asafi-George. Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, good morning to the superintendent, to David, Nate, the team. Just want to touch base. Obviously, it's something I talk about every budget. It's our transportation costs. I think there are somewhere saying maybe a little over 10% of our overall budget costs, but it's a number that continues to go up. And at the same time, we're educating less students, and our kids are not getting to school on time, and lots of issues with respect to the routes, et cetera. So I know that you had undertaken a sort of a study, if you will, to see if we can be doing it a little bit better, number one. And two, I'd rather the money go right directly to the classroom as opposed to, fuel, maintenance, repair, windshield wipers, et cetera. So can we just touch base a little bit on transportation cost and what efforts have been done to get those costs under control? Two, you had mentioned, David, the turnover rate. I just want to get a sense as to what the turnover rate is for teachers, principals, and for our paras. That's obviously a problem, and not quite sure what it is. Is it a burnout factor, or is it clashing between teachers and principals, et cetera? So I'd be curious to see what, if we get into the weeds on retention, what some of those issues are that kind of permeate that issue. And well, I guess we'll start with those two.
Thank you, Councillor Flattery. We are working all year with a transportation specialist. As you know, I hired Mike Terza to come and work with the school district this past school year. And obviously with COVID considerations now, some of the recommendations that he is bringing might shift some, but we do have some quality measures that we were able to put in place that we think are going to really improve transportation next year. Some around registration processes, cleaning up of how we notify families of routing, looking at routing when it happens in the late months of July and August, and making some changes around that. And also working with our routing system as well as our transportation system overall. So there's a number of recommendations that he's brought forward that are around quality. But the real difficulty in really getting our buses on time and moving well is going to be around some of the harder decisions we have to make as a community, around start times, around the tiered busing, around how we do charter school busing and their start times, as well as assignment. So we're looking at all of those pieces right now, and those all impact cost factors. And we're hoping to be able to have some better recommendations moving forward, and then in the response to COVID as well.
And just let me just stay on that briefly. So with respect to the school assignment process, and as it pertains to those that elect to take school transportation, in the past, notices go out very late. In fact, we don't even really get notices back in some instances till after school has started, which caused, and again, superintendent, this predates your taking over as superintendent. So I just want to see when do the assignments go out, and when do individuals get to decide whether they want transportation or not? What's the cutoff? Because in the past, there hasn't been a cutoff. And I'll go back to when my kids attended the Boston Public Schools. We had declined transportation services, yet there was a seat on the bus for my children for the entire school year. So again, waste, obviously that that's just one family. Multiply that by thousands. So I guess, when do people have to make the decision whether they want transportation for their child or not? And then that's when we should be reprogramming everything, not letting it just continue out. Same with school assignment. You could have a situation where a child starts school in one school, and then because a student left or didn't show up at another school that was a preferred school, and that child is number one on the waiting list, or they exercise sibling preference, we then have to kind of revisit the whole thing again, because you'll have a kid going to a different school that needs to be on a different bus. So when is the cutoff for all of this? Because that in lies, that tends to sort of lead to some of these issues that we're dealing with.
Oh, Nate, I'm sorry. Did you take off the mute? Do you wanted to say something and add something, Nate, there?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think, you're absolutely right that we've looked at the transportation opt-out process as a way to make sure that we understand who intends to use transportation in the fall and who doesn't, so that we can get a better sense. As part of this, BPS policy is that students are automatically enrolled and are eligible for transportation if they are eligible for transportation. And over the last 2 years, we've really amped up our opt-out campaign to make sure that we understand reaching out directly to families. I think another challenge that we have is just understanding which schools students are going to enroll in, whether it's private, parochial, charter, or BPS. As you know, we, as being the public school district in the area, that we are required to be able to have a seat for all students if they do choose BPS. So until we have confirmation that they're not enrolling, we do hold those seats, and that creates another sense of churn in the fall. So these are all things that we're working a lot on. We've had a number of teams look at ways to increase sort of the way parents sort of reveal their intention of using transportation. This is something that we will continue to work on. So generally there is no deadline for families to opt out, because families do have a number of circumstances that we need to be ready to serve going into the fall. But we do, the notice is for mid-July for those that registered by the May 29th deadline in terms of notification for schools for this year.
We also have a recommendation from Mr. Terza, and we're kind of keeping our eye on it as we work through the COVID recommendations as well, for an August 7th deadline for registration to be guaranteed a bus, an on-time bus delivery. So we are definitely working on these issues and hope to improve this year. There may be some slight adjustments given assignments and registration due to COVID.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Flaherty. Next up, Councillor Campbell, and then it'll be Councillor Sabi George and Councillor Flynn. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Councillor Bach, and thank you, Superintendent and your team. Just a couple of quick questions. One is there any data or surveys on principals or teacher satisfaction with central office? The second is, so there are obviously this budget calls for new positions to be hired, several hundred. Just curious how many are essentially hired and will be deployed to schools. And then my last question, which probably will take up this round, and if not, I can always add to it, is obviously we're in the midst of COVID-19, and I apologize if this was addressed, but that's going to have an effect on transportation and food costs for FY20 spending. So just curious what the impact is, and is central office going to be increasing or decreasing as well? Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. I don't know if there's a survey of principal satisfaction. Mr. Cooter may know that better than me, and it hasn't been done this year. We did survey our parents around issues of COVID and need most recently. As for new teachers hired, we typically hire around 300 teachers every year. So we are continuing to look at what those needs will be as we begin to adjust schedules for COVID. And then your last question was around, I thought I wrote it down.
Yeah, the second one was more about not just teachers, but the budget calls for several hundred positions to be hired. So curious
Yeah.
how many were essentially hired and deployed to schools. And then the last questions were on COVID-19 and the effect of that on the transportation and food costs of FY20. And then the fourth was, is central office staff increasing or decreasing? Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of the principal survey, we have done principal surveys in the past. I'm starting to date myself now as a 10-year member of the BPS team in terms of how many times over the last 10 years we've done it. We have not done one recently, and there were plans as part of the teacher climate survey to ask questions about central office, but that was of course paused with the disruption due to COVID. For the new positions that we've talked about, and I think in a previous presentation we showed a number of new hires. Those are school-based staff. We are running a central hiring and screening process, as we did with the nurses, to ensure that we have a diverse pool of candidates, that they're meeting our standards for quality, and meeting the job as sort of described for this new initiative. But that's a central screening process, and then we work with the school-based teams to make sure that they fit and are hired at the school level. And so in terms of central staff, we made some investments in central staff to support the oversight of new positions. So an example of that is we have a number of related service providers in special education that needed better supervisory infrastructure. So we did add some of those central functions. Many of the new positions that we're creating in terms of the superintendent's restructuring are cost neutral and are reshifts of resources from one department to the other. We're not seeing a significant increase in central office going into next year. And then your final question, I think the superintendent mentioned it. We're looking at a number of different scenarios around COVID. We'll talk about this more extensively this afternoon. And so it'd be premature to say whether or not there's going to be increased transportation costs. And depending on how food services goes and how we deliver services will really impact whether or not we are able to cover that with the federal meals program reimbursements.
Thank you. And then one just quick follow-up, it's a comment, not a question, is for any of the surveys from principals with respect to central office, can that be shared with the council? And then the second is if there are anything with respect to the teachers, if that could also be shared. And if not, because of obviously COVID-19, I appreciate that some things were obviously switched or changed as a result, your plans changed. Understand that, but if there's anything that might speak to teacher survey or satisfaction, that would be helpful too. Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Bach.
Great, thank you so much, Councillor Campbell. Next up is Councillor Asabi George, then it'll be Councillor Flynn, and then Councillor Braden. Councillor Asabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the superintendent and everyone here this morning. I do have a few follow-up questions to Councillor Flaherty's points on transportation. Since I joined the council, I've held more or less every year this mid-year assessment on spending because it's a place where we typically see considerable overruns. And I am curious with this year and the abbreviated school year, have we seen any cost savings in transportation? And I'm wondering about what we're thinking about transportation in the new year, as well as anything that's changed either because of Mr. Terzer's assessment of transportation. Is that assessment or review available yet? And then there are some transportation concerns in the MOU. So just curious if you could speak to those pieces. And then I will actually, before you get to that, I will thank the district. I think over the last few years, there's been some pretty aggressive phone calling to families, whether or not they will be on transportation or not. And that's really sort of got us to a more real number. As a BPS parent, my kids were also assigned to a bus for a full school year after, and this was a number of years ago, after numerous phone calls to take them off. The new process, I think, had some success getting a real number of kids that should be assigned to school buses. So I think Nate maybe led that effort for the district. Thank you.
In terms of the transportation costs, so we are not running transportation obviously this spring with the shutdown. But our largest cost in terms of transportation really is employee pay. Since we've continued to maintain employee pay during the shutdown, many of the places that you would see savings if you were not operating as not being realized. We are projecting modest savings, and we're continuing to work with the transportation team to understand the costs from fuel for diesel and both. We have a number of propane-powered buses, and then also some savings in terms of maintenance costs. I will say that we also have vendors that we pay as part of the sort of out-of-district, because we don't have contracts with those. Those are sort of an as-needed basis. We are realizing some savings there, but we're also using those to do some of our meal delivery service on an as-needed basis. So, so those are the big areas for transportation in terms of this spring.
There's
yes.
one other thing, we're to have some new technology recommendations potentially to help with efficiencies and routing. And so some of that is being done. I think we're also looking at our monitors and the number of monitors on a bus, and for special education for some cost savings there, as well as the better efficiencies in communication systems with families around text messaging and other caller and dialer systems to support families getting notified sooner. And then also the turnaround once you get registered, the turnaround and how fast you're getting a bus. So those are some of the recommendations we think that are going to improve some of the efficiencies for our parents and notifications so they're not so frustrated.
Yeah, there are definitely, that's a good reminder, there are 2 capital investments for transportation technology to be able to be sort of smarter and more nimble as an organization. And the transportation bus monitors, the efficiency of how they're routed and how they're serving kids is definitely an area of focus for us for next year.
Great. And then the transportation for students that are experiencing homelessness. I know over time we've gotten much better in the turnaround to that reassignment when a child is moved from one shelter to another or becomes homeless and is placed in a shelter. I don't know if we've got updated numbers on sort of the average time it takes to accurately have transportation squared away for that child. And then my last question, so if I think David was maybe nodding his head to respond to that. So I'd love just an update on that. And then some conversation that came up in our working session. I think Councilor O'Malley also brought it up and he may want to speak to it in greater length, but any conversation around electrifying our bus fleet and potential cost savings over the long run that might provide. Excuse me, tongue twister this morning. Thank you. And that's it for me this round, Chair Bach.
I would just say on the homeless transportation, one of the things that we're looking at this year that's new is increased eligibility for circuit breaker to be able to reimburse us for those. So that's just something as we start to think about potential vulnerabilities in state funding as state revenues go down, that this is an area that we're going to want to make sure that they continue to fund circuit breaker and fund this new provision, because that was a big opportunity for us to be able to receive additional funding as a district. The electric buses is an interesting one. I've heard of other districts who have partnered with the utilities to be able to pay for the electric buses because they're a good source of storing energy over the summer when we're not using them. That's something that we will, that I know has been discussed. That's obviously a significant capital investment, the electric buses. And so that's why other districts have partnered with the utility companies in that way. And then David, I didn't know if you had the numbers in terms of the turnaround for, I believe it's been 3 days from the time we identify a student to when they are routed on a bus to be able to attend school. This has been a big focus for our team and something that I know you've been a champion of, but we are really focused on making sure that we have that continuity for the students in those who have become homeless or changed placements, because the school can really be their sort of anchor to their community. We want to make sure that we're serving them as quickly and as effectively as possible.
If I could just add one point, because I think it deserves recognition. It was probably about 4 years ago that it took an average of 7 to 10 days to reassign a student that was experiencing homelessness and get them back into the classroom. So the 3 days, and I know that you are, that everyone at the school department from top to bottom is trying to shrink that to 1 day, but to hear 3 days is really is very promising, and congratulations and thank you. That's it for me.
Just
Yeah, I'll
one
just throw
other
out a
thing,
quick-
Counselor, that I wanted to share too is not only are we working here internally on our own systems, we also are working with our TransDev contractor as well on their oversight and support to the system.
Great. Great. Thank you so much, Superintendent and Counselor Sabi George. Next up is Counselor Flynn, and then it'll be Counselor Braden and then Counselor Wu. Counselor Flynn?
Thank you, Councilor Block, and thank you to the superintendent and her team for being here this morning. I have two questions, comments. Number one, I was on a call over the weekend with some parents in the Asian community. Their children are in the special needs programs throughout BPS. The parents speak limited or no English at all. They just wanted to generally ask what type of outreach are we going to do to the parents over the summertime, and I told them I would get back with an answer. And the second question, Superintendent, is with a lot of parents not working over the last several months, maybe even going into the summer, hourly workers not getting paid, not working for the school department, but outside of the city. Are there any programs, and our students weren't able to go to various doctors or the dentist for health checkups or anything, but are there any programs that we may want to expand for children, for students, especially as it relates to medical care, because their parents may not be able to afford the bills, such as dental care or help with other services as well? Just want to see what your thoughts might be on that, Superintendent.
Yeah, thank you, Counselor. Obviously, this time of COVID has really unveiled a lot of the inequities within our system for our families, and many of them are still struggling quite a bit. And so we do have partnerships with dental groups and vision groups and health groups as well. And that's why we're putting investments in this budget to expand our hub school model and our community-based schools to better partner with our many partners out there. I don't have the exact numbers on how those have increased during this time of COVID, but we can certainly get it to you. As Mr. Bloom said earlier, we have over 200 partners that we are working with, and they range from like Children's and Brigham Health and many others who are working on the mental health side as well as health access side for our families. And so that's just absolutely critical that we provide those connections for our families. As for communicating, we tried and strive to communicate in all 10 of our major languages. Anytime we're communicating, we use text, robocalls, and sometimes mailings, and then also going out in the community and using some of our community-based providers as well. And so we'll continue to do that.
Thank you, Superintendent, and thank you to your team. That's all I have, Councilor Block. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Counselor Flynn. Next up, Counselor Braden, then Counselor Wu, then Counselor Mejia. Counselor Braden.
Thank you, Counselor Bob. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for all your.
Counselor Braden, I at least can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you.
You should start over.
In terms of out-of-district transportation, how many students is there a breakdown on the number of students that are out-of-district placements, and then how many need one-to-one monitors or a nurse monitor, and what's the cost of that service?
I don't know. I think Mr. Bloom's looking for that number.
Yeah, we can have the total cost for you. And I think in terms of the number of students served, we may need to get back to you at a future date, but David has the cost of one-to-one monitors and then out of district. I'll just take one moment.
Yeah, so it's a little bit hard to separate the one-to-one monitors from the general monitors. Overall, We have $11 million budgeted for attendants to ride buses. Some of those are group monitors, some of them are one-to-one. And then more broadly speaking, across transportation, for special education students who are traveling out of the city, we're expecting to spend somewhere between $16 and $17 million for next year on transportation. So this is obviously a significant cost, and one that we are sort of constantly working to bring down with better efficiencies.
Thank you. The other thing, I'd like to commend you on your efforts to do pop-up enrollment clinics. I got the opportunity, a parent in the district asked me to come and observe the process at the local Brazilian Women's Association last fall, and it was they'd had a really successful day with about 26 families come in and were able to speak their own language and get that. So that's a really important piece in terms of your making it more accessible. I know Alston Brighton is a distance from Dudley, and I think people appreciated the opportunity to do the enrollment locally. So I hope that will continue. And then the other, in terms of central staff, the number, I'm a physical therapist, worked in school, special needs school for many years. How many speech pathologists, OTs and PTs do you have? And is that population, is that staffing ratio stable? And is it difficult to recruit staff for those jobs?
So our staffing ratio for those related service providers is projected to remain flat for next year. One of the things we're working in collaboration with the BTU on in regards to service delivery there is to think about how to best balance caseload versus workload, ensuring that there's not just an even caseload, but that the caseload is actually representative of the workload of those providers. Yeah. 10 consults versus 10, hour day sessions are not exactly the same caseload. So, and we haven't heard anything, I don't believe, about difficulty in terms of recruiting and hiring there. I know we're continuing to work to sort of provide better services.
I'm just curious, over the summer, I know this is an exceptional circumstance this summer, but over the summer, do those service providers provide service for summer school, or do you bring in other staff to do that over the summer? Because not everyone signs up to do summer school, I don't think.
I will have to get back to you on that, but I can get back to you on that shortly.
Yeah, I believe all of the services that continue over the summer would be written depending on the individual IEP. And if it was written into the IEP, they're either provided through ESY or through continued services. I think you're right that there's an option for teachers.
ESY is extended school year. Those are for students whose IEP determines that they need those services to be able to continue to show gains or not regress.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you. That's all my questions for now.
Great, excellent. Thank you, Councillor Braden. Councillor Wu, and then it'll be Councillor Mejia and Council President Janey. I should note we were joined by Councillor Janey, Councillor O'Malley, and Councillor O'Malley since the start. So Councillor Wu, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to everyone. I have 9 minutes before I have to start Blaze on his remote learning program, so I'm going to try and go fast. 3 questions. One is the superintendent referenced charter school and other non-BPS start times as affecting transportation. So I was wondering what the latest thinking was on that, and if there are any changes planned. Secondly, along a similar vein, any further thinking on high school start times and sort of the overall system relative to that. And then switching gears for my last question on food, just looking for an update on the good food purchasing program that had been put in place from our ordinance passed, I think last year, or maybe the year before, and what the most recent implementation updates are. Thank you.
Yeah, so Counselor Wu, start times are obviously a big part of efficiencies in transportation. So those are always something that we're going to look at. So we have been trying to meet with our charter school partners around their start times, as well as looking at our own start times. And can that create some efficiencies, especially if we are looking at the fall and any kind of implications for opening this fall and how any kind of new schedule for social distancing might impact that. So we just have to be really good partners with our compact and continue to meet with them to look at ways that we can do our transportation in a cost-effective way. There is no proposal on the table at this point for any high school start time change or any other start time changes. It's really just exploring those options at this point to see if they need to be adjusted in terms of our reopening plans. We'll make sure we're very transparent with the community about that. And then for good food purchasing, we have a current RFP out, and that's in process right now for our food processing, as well as you know, there's an expansion of the My Way Cafe program for next year. Again, with qualifiers, some of these transportation, some of these operational issues, facility issues, and others we may address later on in the afternoon session, because much of what we do next fall may look different. And there's many considerations as we begin to look, and contingencies as we begin to look forward toward the fall.
Thank you.
You all set, Councilor Wu?
Yes, I'm good.
Great. Best wishes to Blaze with the remote learning. All right.
BPS student right there.
Sumner School.
All right. Next up is Councilor Mejia, and then it'll be Council President Janey, and then Councilor O'Malley. Councilor Mejia.
Hiya. Good morning, all. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep, hear you great.
All right. Dr. Casillas, it's good to see you. Good to see you, Nate, the whole crew. All right, so I have a few questions. I'm just curious. I would like to get a little bit more information on the one-on-one bus monitors. I know, I'd like to know how many are employed by the school district. And I know Councilor Breeden asked about how much money in the budget is put towards paying these one-on-one monitors. I would also like to push to get that information, because during the February 24th hearing on BPS transportation, someone from BPS had mentioned how expensive of a line item these one-on-one bus monitors are. So I would really like to know what that exact cost is. In regards to school safety, can you talk a little bit about the relationship between BPS and the BRIC? What kinds of information is shared between these two departments? I have a few questions about the BPS school police officers. The website does not state any language requirements for these officers. The exam that the officers have to take says that these officers only need to be fluent in English. In schools with a high percentage of students who speak languages other than English with their friends, could this cause a problem? What is being done to make sure that our officers are able to understand and communicate with our students? The base wage, and also I'm curious because the base wage of these police officers is less than 50 cents above the minimum wage. At such low starting wage, are we attracting a lot of seasoned, highly trained officers for these positions? Can you talk a little bit about the breakdown of these officers, what kinds of trainings they receive, what is their background, etc.? Just curious about those things.
Yeah, thank you, Counselor. I think Mr. Bloom's looking up some numbers, as well as Mr. Cooter, for us and some of those issues. We do not share information with the BRIC. We only share information with the Boston Public Police Department when there is a health and safety need to do so, an immediate health and safety need to do so. As for the BPS school police officers, we are working to train them and continue to do training for our police officers around not only data privacy, but also around how they interact with students and what those qualifications are. I look forward to having a stakeholder engagement process coming up here pretty soon about the overall health and safety needs that we're going to need around reopening of our schools. Gives us a great opportunity to look at how we want to engage with our Boston school police and our Boston police department and how we can do that better in the future. As you know, we are right now working on a policy of both access and data privacy, and I'm going to be working with the community around that policy in the very near future to try to get something that everybody can get behind.
I do have a follow-up in terms of just the vendors that we're using for these cultural competency trainings, if you will. I'm going to assume that some of that we're looking in Boston and folks who have a deep understanding of the issues of racial tension in the city of Boston. Just curious about who are the vendors that we're contracting to do these trainings. Do we have a list of those vendors? Do we know, are we seeking people who live in Boston?
Currently, a lot of our training comes straight out of our equity office, and they provide a bunch of our training to our officers around that as well. We've been training them on data privacy with our own staff, but we do look outside for training occasionally. I don't think that there has been any specific training at this point, but it's something that's on our radar to do in the future.
And I can provide some of the numbers on the transportation one-to-one monitors and general monitors that you had asked about. We do have 456 students who require a one-to-one monitor. For each of those students, the cost is $10,400 per monitor. We also have 1,050 general students who require a general monitor. Now that's not a one-to-one, so that doesn't mean we have 1,000 general bus monitors. So the cost per student who requires a general monitor on average is about $2,000 per year. Total projected cost for monitors for next year is $10.6 million. The starting rate for the last contract for our safety officers was $21 an hour per hour for patrol officers before they get any of the college credits and other things that are part of their pay. So I'm not sure the 50 cents per hour over minimum wage. I'm not sure where the discrepancy is. The minimum wage is much lower than 21 per hour. So I'm not sure what that refers to.
Thank you for that clarity. And Dr. Casilius, are you okay? Your energy seems a little bit low today. I'm just going to make sure. I know we could be a terror guy, intimidating here, but I want you to know that this is, this is part of the process, and we really appreciate you and all of the hard work that you're doing to help support our most vulnerable students. So I just want you to know that we appreciate you, okay?
Oh yeah, I appreciate you too. I'm just a little tired today, but I'm good.
Okay, all right. That's all. Chairman Bach, keep it moving.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Next up, Council President Janey, then it'll be Councilor O'Malley, and then we'll also be joined by Councilor Edwards. President Janey.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep. A little tired as well, but good to see you guys. At this rate, I see you more than I see my own family, sadly. And don't take that the wrong way. That's sadly at the end. It's good to see you guys. I wanted to follow up on some of the transportation questions. Could we have a breakdown of all of the transportation money? So I'd be really interested in what percentage is being spent toward choice, what percentage is being spent on special education. I would love a special breakout for the out of district. How much is MBTA? Do we have that readily available? That little pie chart? I mean, we usually do with
we could certainly get it for you, Counselor.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have it right now at my fingertips. I can tell you, we definitely can provide some of that breakdown. So percent by the sort of general school choice, certainly MBTA, and then out of district are readily available.
As well as the in-district special education, so the door-to-door breakdown as well.
Yeah, to a certain extent, the distinction between door-to-door and the traditional yellow bus sometimes has to do with where the pickup is and whether or not the monitor. So sometimes the buses are mixed. So it's not like there's necessarily one bus that just does special ed and will drive by a gen ed student. There's some dynamics. So sometimes the split of that is a little bit of a projected cost and by student.
I can appreciate that. If
Yeah.
you could provide that, that would be helpful. I'm really interested. Every year we hear that rerouting is going to save us money. I'd be interested in whether or not that is true. Certainly interested in the plans and thinking around start times, particularly as it pertains to high school students. And I heard Councilor Wu mention that. And just for clarity's sake, I think I heard in response to Councilor Flaherty, there aren't any savings. The priority was to continue to pay the workforce. So in terms of transportation savings during school buildings being closed, we didn't realize any significant savings. Yes, that's true, right?
In terms of the significant when compared to the overall 120 million budget, yes.
Yeah. Yes.
They're much more modest. I think we're looking at some projected savings in fuel and some projected savings in maintenance costs for the buses.
Moving forward for FY21, as we will hopefully be transporting students to school buildings. Obviously, we don't know that just yet, but obviously interested in whatever the plans are for our students who have to travel via MBTA, our students who have to travel on yellow school buses, our students who are walking. What are all the plans for ensuring student safety? And so interested in your response to that.
Yeah, I think student safety is one of the critical factors that we're looking at overall when we start to plan for the fall. Certainly with students traveling MBTA, the number of students that we can have on a bus are really critical factors for us thinking about.
So is there a plan? I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm just mindful that we all have very limited time and I don't want to spend all of my time on transportation. Is there a plan in place for thinking about the safety of children as they travel to school, however they travel? Because it's clear to me that when we do open buildings, and it's not clear when we'll do that, but when we do that, we will still most likely have to have some precautions in place. So.
Yes, of course. I mean, we want to absolutely have those. That's on our list. Transportation is probably one of the biggest things that we are most worried about and addressing in our reopening plan. So.
Okay, wonderful. Good to know. I am very interested in procurement. I saw in, I think it might have been page 12 of the slide presentation, that there have been new plans because of the food ordinance that was passed. I'm wondering what new plans or policies or procedures are being put in place to ensure more diversity and more local opportunity. And when I say diversity, I mean people of color as well as women.
Yeah, our procurement team has been participating in the city's overall efforts for more local and minority women-owned businesses. That's something that we're trying to find new and effective ways to promote all of those businesses. I think one of the things that ends up being a sort of complicating factor for BPS is the number of procurement officers effectively that we have, with individual schools placing orders, 125 schools, 50 central office departments. One of the best things that we can do, one of the high leverage strategies that we're trying to do is identify vendors and make sure people are aware of what vendors are available so that they understand the sort of value and importance in sort of promoting the local and women and minority owned businesses as well. So that's something that we're.
So I believe that that we should be taking advantage of other opportunities or putting other plans in place, because I don't think that strategy is yielding what we want to see. So I guess, what more can we do? What else is being done?
Yeah, I would love to partner with you more on this and understand. I know business services is one of the functions of finance. So if you have ideas that you want us to explore or implement, you can reach out to me directly. I'd love to be a source of a real big success case for the city and in this category.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Nate. I really appreciate that. I see the gavel. I'm not waiting for the chime. I do have lots of questions, so I'll wait for the next round. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you so much, Madam President. All right, next up is Councillor O'Malley, and then it'll be Councillor Edwards. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. Good morning, Superintendent, to your team. Great to see you all. Hope you had at least a little bit of time to relax a bit over this long weekend. Delighted to be talking about Commitment 5 today. I think of all the commitments, which I obviously stand with and support wholeheartedly, cultivating trust is a really important one. There's been some criticism leveled at BPS in years past and prior administrations that the trust was broken. And I know this is something everyone, particularly you, Superintendent, really feel strongly about, is repairing and truly cultivating that trust. So I appreciate looking at sort of these important topics through that lens. Obviously, topic one, the diversity of our staff is crucial, and strategies to make sure that we can not only recruit candidates of color to serve in these incredibly important roles, but also to maintain them. So appreciate that. In terms of central office reorganization or restructure, I was wondering if you could furnish to the council, doesn't have to be now, but just for my own curiosity, sort of a new reorganizational chart for how you see your cabinet, specifically your sort of kitchen cabinet superintendent. That would be helpful, just with the names as well associated with their positions and sort of the, the org chart. Can you talk briefly about the hub schools model and wraparound services? I don't know if that's you, Super, Nate, or anyone else.
Yeah, so I would be glad to talk about my org chart. We're just doing some final conversations with some of the folks that I'm looking at in terms of how we want to restructure, especially given COVID, to better support principals and our teachers around their professional development and learning. And then your second question was what?
The hub schools, just talk briefly about sort of the model for wraparound services, please.
So we've been working on a model with Corey Harris, who is our Chief Accountability Office, looking at more of an internal support system for students and providing services on the campus. But also, as you know, that's part of the community school model, is to also work with external partners outside and getting families connected to external partners. So both of those philosophies are what we're trying to do, with a start on the internal first in our 33 transformation schools. That's the addition of the social worker, the family layouts and positions, really to work with the school leaders and our new equity roundtables to make sure that we're activating our partnerships and making sure that there's equity across schools. As you know, in Boston Public Schools, many times we have some disparity between our schools in terms of fundraising or in terms of partnerships, and we want to get a handle on that with this new hub school model.
Okay, great, thank you. Obviously, transportation is I think, a huge topic to all counselors and all of you as well. Just the significant cost year after year after year. We're cutting the number of students whom we serve, yet the cost seems to be going up. As an environmentalist, I applaud the move to more fuel efficient vehicles. I'd certainly add my voice to the echo of looking at electrified fleet of buses is certainly where we have to go. There seems to be this misconception that the battery life would not allow for a bus to be able to be out for 8-10 hours on a battery. That's simply not true. There are European countries who've been using electrified school buses for years. So I look forward to that day, hopefully sooner rather than later, where we can talk about an all electrified fleet. Additionally, I'm curious, we pay a huge price for our out of district transportation. And I wonder if any of those costs have been recouped, given the fact that school hasn't been in session across the state for the last several months. Was any of the funding, I understand why, and I think that Councillor Janey brought this up the last round, that sort of the BPS and even more of the charter school bus drivers were still paid and still performed some different duties, but duties nonetheless. But I'm talking specifically about these out of district placements that we're paying, the equivalent of 30, 40, 50, sometimes even $60,000 per pupil for transportation. I see Nate nodding, which I take as a good sign.
Yeah, so I think we experienced some small savings with some of our transportation costs. However, though, we have served almost 200,000 meals to our students who have disabilities, which we're very proud of, as well as over 600,000 meals overall. And so we have paid our bus drivers and our monitors during this time. And of course, budgets, most of our larger budgets are, caught up in employee costs. But there's
Agreed.
been,
And
fuel costs.
I guess I'm specifically, Sue, and you have done yeoman's work on the food delivery, a national model I think we've done in BPS, and I'm not at all critical of that, or the bus drivers. They've been a huge part of our success here. I guess my question specifically is, there's a very small pool of individuals whom we pay an exorbitant and incredibly high fee for out-of-district transportation. I'm just curious where that sort of fit in with the fact that they haven't been taking students to school because there has been no school. These are the people who are going to the private schools up on the North Shore, and we're paying, again, $70,000 per pupil for transportation costs.
Yeah, we have realized some savings for those private vendors that we were using for those out of district placements for the portion of the year that we're not doing the driving. Some of the costs and the per pupil costs are BPS drivers who are driving to out of district placement as well. So all of the out of district is not done by private vendors. It's a mixed delivery model, and so there is some savings on that side, and then some costs that will continue to be maintained.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Sue. So my time is nearly up. I just ask, I love the focus on the welcome centers, making them more family friendly, making them more warmer, using more of the Apple Store model of just service. I'm curious, have we seen a spike in enrollment inquiries, given sort of the uncertainty of what school will look like over the last couple of weeks or months?
In terms of the total number of people registering for schools, we are seeing a decrease from prior years. It's hard to say what is the cause of it. I mean, one is simply the welcome centers being closed and most of it being online. We think that some families are waiting until things reopen. Also, as people are staying in place, we're monitoring to see if we're going to see less families moving to Boston, immigrating to Boston as part of this. We're monitoring both numbers to kind of see what happens, and then as we start to open things up over the summer, or we start to move through different phases of reopening. We're going to wait and see what happens with registration. But it's something that, we look at those numbers on a weekly basis.
No, sure. So how much of a decrease ballpark would you say?
I can look at that, and I don't want to, I would be off probably in an order of magnitude, but let me look and I can get that number too.
I'd be curious. And what's the button say on your lapel, Nate?
That says BPS proud.
Love it. Looking good. On message and looking good. Thank you, Sue. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Councillor O'Malley. Next up, Councillor Lydia Edwards.
Thank you very much. The exchange, Councillor O'Malley asked a lot of my questions, as did some of my my other colleagues. So, and I just wanted to check in specifically about, we had an issue with transportation equity, as you may be fully aware, in terms of buses going to the exam schools from my district. Specifically, my district, I think, was at least by BPS's own analysis, was found to have had one of the hardest commutes to BLA. Because it was, either East Boston takes 2 trains and so on and so forth. And we went back and forth about that. And I guess I'm trying to figure out what analysis you look at still going forward in terms of equity, in terms of difficulty to come to and from not just exam schools. So that's one thing. What's your equity analysis on transportation? I think when I got in a conversation about this last time, the response was, we're providing transportation. So that's our response to equity. So I didn't find that response to be very satisfactory. So tell me about your equity analysis and what kids have to travel to get to and from districts, and whether they get that bus or they don't.
So we provide, Counselor, thank you for that question. Obviously, equity is at top of mind. I do know that we provide several shuttles, and we do look at equity as our frame on all decision making. So I would be glad to hear more about your situation there in East Boston, and also as we think about moving forward with any new recommendations or adjustments that we are thinking about making.
Well, I will say this, the situation is for all parts of my district, and it had to do, in this example, with the BLA bus leaving from North Station. There were high school students getting on it. There were middle school students not getting on it. But more importantly, the great thing is East Boston's population is growing, and we're increasing the number of kids going to exam schools. This is all good stuff. So when will we get to the analysis or the point where East Boston is looking at getting a bus? It had one before going to BLA. When and how would you have that analysis based off of, you know, how many kids and their kind of commute to get to BLA? That's maybe you haven't done that yet for this particular, you know, moment, but I'd like to know what that analysis looks like when you're going to increase bus services for a neighborhood or not. And you know, one of the responses was, you know, well, kids coming from other neighborhoods to East Boston or to Charlestown don't necessarily have increased bus services. So I'm not disagreeing with that. I just want to know what your analysis is in terms of how you decide to get additional buses or not. So that's where I am.
Yeah, I know that there was an analysis done in the past. What I'm suggesting is probably there will need to be a new one given COVID and also some of our new recommendations and how does that impact in the overall entire system. So we would be glad to share that with you in the future.
And in terms of, I'll leave sorry, I won't do it, Chairwoman. I won't bring up the COVID questions. I'll wait till this afternoon. But just back on the bus analysis and also alternative means of commuting to school. You know, we're talking about scooters. We're talking about bikes, you know, increasing that kind of different modes of transportation in the city of Boston. I brought this up last time. I'll continue to bring it up. Is there any thoughts of BPS kids using scooters or using bikes to go to school? You know.
Not at this time, there isn't. I think that there was a lot of issues with liability and, you know, traffic and safety for children that would probably have to be taken up.
No, I agree.
And lots of questions to be answered about that.
No, I agree. I just know that the more that those things are available, readily available to the public, you couldn't have kept me off a scooter once that was available to me in high school or close to it. I would be on it. So we're very likely to roll out alternative means of transportation for adults or for everybody else. I'm wondering how BPS navigates that. So I'll bring it up, and as we're rolling it out, we were starting to have that conversation last year. So I'll be bringing it up every year, including when it's finally there. I'm hoping BPS is also having this analysis too. And then finally, in terms of I want to say 2 budget cycles ago, we had discussed bus monitors and the budget. And specifically, there was a certain percentage of them that were paid or on paid leave for disciplinary action. It's actually a lot more than I remember thinking, be shocked by the amount of people were paying not to work because of disciplinary action. And I was curious then, I'm still curious now, how many are paid not to work due to disciplinary action? What does that mean in terms of numbers, like dollars? And also how soon or what is the process to make sure that we recoup some of that money, especially they're not coming back? And that's my final question.
Yeah, I'd have to get back to you on the number of that's currently. I don't know what it has been historically, but I will get that number and get that to you.
Thank you. That's it.
You all set? Great. Thanks so much. And I'll jump to my questions, and then we'll go up top for a second round. Good morning, Superintendent. I guess one question I have is sort of related to central office costs and kind of, you know, as we've centrally budgeted more of these school costs, it becomes a little tricky on the council side to kind of tell like what are central office costs that are real central office costs and what's actually, you know, at a school site. And I wonder if you could speak to that proportion and also kind of speak to what efforts we make to benchmark ourselves against other large school departments, just because, you know, I think we hear all the time from families and teachers concerns about, you know, does the central office become too top heavy? And just making sure that we're pushing resources down to whichever level is most going to help the kids. So I would love to hear you speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, so it's always on our mind to have the smallest percentages possible at administrative level. But as we have moved really to, and this might be better discussion for later this afternoon, we are moving a little bit more centralized in terms of the delivery of the remote learning. So there are some things that we're going to have to invest on around that in terms of our plan for all schools and what has to get done. And then also, just how do we better support school leaders at central office? So there are some additional supports there and within our equity focus as well. And how do we support the equity focus and drive that work and the CLSP work, the culturally, linguistically sustaining practices we want to have in our school system, or ethnic studies, and some of the leadership around some of the work we're doing in our academic office. So there are a few investments that I'm thinking of in terms of better supporting the work in such a large district so that our 125 schools work a little bit more together or can opt into some of the centralized offerings that we have for professional development.
And
yeah,
go ahead, Nate. Sorry.
I'm sorry, if I could just add. So we present a slide every year that has what we refer to as our service categories. Our service categories break down our budget by not just sort of central versus schools on the budget that you're talking about, but what you're referring to is school services budgeted centrally. Those are the items that show up on a central office sort of responsibility center. They're responsible for managing the expense, but they're not expenses that you would see in a central office. A big example of that is our custodians, where we have a major investment in custodians. 25 new custodians going into the budget for next year. That shows up in a central budget, but is a school service budgeted centrally. So our categories of that we consider our schools, school services budgeted centrally, central, and then non-BPS student services. The non-BPS student services are representing those costs of doing things like transportation for charter schools and other out-of-district school costs. For central, our percentage of our overall budget for central is a little over 5%. When we've done benchmarks with other Council of Great City Schools districts, we find that we are lean. Our payroll costs per employee, and when we start to look at other benchmarks, I think Boston has been promoting for the last 10 years or so, really this decentralization and the autonomy of schools that has pushed a lot of services to the school level and a lot of the responsibility to the school level, oftentimes at a detriment. And one of the things that we're seeing during COVID is that decentralization is really difficult to manage when we need to rapidly redeploy our resources. And so I do think that we need to start thinking about things like our literacy investment is about providing high quality central services that schools will want to opt in on. And by providing the really high quality services, it's not about autonomy or whether it's central, it's about quality, and those schools will opt in. And we're already seeing some of our schools ask to be a part of the literacy adoption because they're seeing that we're doing it in a very different way than we've done in the past. And so that's an exciting part for us. But the simple answer to your question is about 5% of our budget is to true central, and that is lower than most other districts, if not all districts of our size and complexity.
Great. And if you have any of that benchmark info, I'd love to have it. I wonder, I wanted to ask about sort of the implementation when schools opt into something, sort of how those relationships work. I asked this partly because one reaction that I got to our last set of hearings together was from some folks who were very excited about the rollout of ethnic studies, but who felt like on the teacher and student side, like they didn't really have standing in the conversation about how to implement that and how to roll that out. And so there were just a lot of questions, which I certainly wasn't equipped to answer. So I sort of, and to me, that I both have a question about that specifically. How are you thinking about rolling out ethnic studies? And then a more general question about how you make sure that there isn't that communication gap when we've got a new initiative that we want to partner with schools on.
Yes, so Counselor, it's a good question. It's one of implementation. And so our academic office has been working on ethnic studies content and courses and course development. And then just recently has launched a partnership with UMass that work is going to be commencing, and that because the entire academic office is going to more of a teacher-led model, we will be working with the teachers around that through our Telescope network. And BTU has representation, as well as the district office will have partnerships to do that implementation over the next school year. But that's just getting off the ground now. Telescope has been in place for a while. And I actually asked this question because President Tang brought it to my attention that there hasn't been good communication in terms of the project. And so I spoke with our chief academic officer, and she is actually working and reaching out with Jessica and her team to be able to move forward with that project.
Great, good to hear. And then a last quick one for me would just be, I did notice that there was a significant increase in family and medical leave this year, I think in some of the actuals that we got over from you guys. And I was just wondering, Nate, if that was related to COVID, if that was pre-COVID.
Yeah, the projected increase in leave cost was pre-COVID. It was not related to that. The big piece there is and Al Taylor and his team have really been working on some of the human capital operations to really get more accurate sort of tracking and information. And the leave process is something that they've been really focused on. And so what we're doing is more accurately recording employees on leave. We're also seeing an increase, and this is a great thing, an increase in paternity and maternity leave due to the city's change in policy to be able to fund those. So that's another area that we are, I don't think I'm ever really excited about cost increases, but as a parent, I know that this is a huge benefit for our employees and something that's gonna be great for families. So I think that's a great added expense.
Great, thanks so much. That's my time elapsed. So we'll go back up to the top. Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very brief. I just want to know how we're working with our partner organizations that have been so critical to our students, particularly given their financial hardships in light of COVID-19. Also want to know what type of partnerships we're looking to support increased digital remote learning, and also what type of partnerships we're exploring to with respect to our vocational school support as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Partnerships, and this is the Activate partnership session, and there's just so many partners that we have, and so many folks coming forward, especially during this time, to partner with us. Boston After School and Beyond. We've been partnering with the PIC on summer jobs. We've been partnering with a number of organizations around mental health service and providers. We've been partnering with our city partners as well to provide housing and food access, as well as health access. So just a broad opportunity here to really dig in and solidify some of our partnerships. We've been intentional with that around our equity roundtable as well, where we've had anywhere from 80 to 120 people on those calls each week, and then doing breakout groups and partnering and really thinking deeply about this work, and having our school leaders also convene equity roundtables and have asked them to have partners at the table for those equity roundtables as well. Some of our higher ed partners have talked about online learning and digital learning in particular. I don't know the actual specifics of those conversations at this point, but I think every day I have a new offer in my email box from somebody around partnering around the tech side and digital learning and remote learning. And there's just a great opportunity here to maximize some of the benefits of that as we begin to look at a one-to-one proposal here within this budget. So
thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. Next up, Councillor Asabi George, then it'll be Councillor Braden. Councillor Asabi George.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. I want to shift gears and talk about BPS athletics, something that's been really important to me as a former athlete and a former coach when I was teaching. And first, I'd like to give special thanks to Avery, who's the director of athletics, and Billy Sittig, who's over there, and just the real change in what they've been able to do to engage young people and our student athletes in what's happening. I've had the benefit of participating in a few videos and sort of words of wisdom and motivation, and have watched others do the same. And I think it's a great way to engage our student athletes. And also recognizing that so many of our kids right now are, as they're out of school and doing school from home, that it's, athletics has not been able to be a part of their everyday life. I know my own boys really were disappointed that school wasn't happening. My oldest, in fact, probably the second week of March said, well, was excited to advocate for school to get shut down, and then said, but baseball can still happen, right? And I was like, no, school doesn't happen, baseball's not happening. And it was a real blow for him, and something that he as a freshman was looking forward to playing this year, and as were my other kids. So I'm just curious about our, we can talk about the impact of COVID on fall sports. We can do that now. We can do that in a later hearing. But aside from COVID, I'd love to just talk a little bit about any potential investments or increase in investment, especially with high school redesign underway. How do we improve sort of the quality of play through adding coaches and adding athletic trainers, supporting our kids in skill development, both on and off season, recognizing that there are some MIAA restrictions to that, but just I recognize that sports and athletics plays a really important role in our kids' academic achievement. I think it's directly related to attendance and engagement in school, especially during a particular season. And would just love to hear a little bit more about the picture for athletics going forward.
Yeah, so thanks for that question. Because this is a 3-year budget, I anticipate that those investments will come year 2 when we are actually looking at the expansion of our 7-12 high schools and really working on the high school redesign, which we will be speaking to tomorrow at school committee. So really, really excited about the work, and have asked Avery Esdale to come with a proposal for what does that look like in the district, and how do we ramp up intramural sports for some of our younger students, and have some inter-city competitions between the students, and then strong 9th grade teams, strong junior varsity teams leading into our varsity teams that could be more competitive on the statewide basis and regionally. So this is something that is top of mind because it's really important for our kids to be connected when they come to school. This is also true for the performing arts and the visual arts. So both of these things very important to the youth in terms of their engagement, connectedness, and really our cultural awareness programs as well at school, and how we express ourselves and connect culturally with one another.
The only thing I'd add to that is when we, specific to athletics, and not to discount certainly the other efforts to engage kids, whether it's through art, whether it's through music and other activities, specific to athletics and specific to Title IX, which I know is really important to you, Dr. Caselius, is that we're fully funding strong programs and developing stronger programs where we have some weaknesses, because we recognize how important it is. But then we're also thinking about the Title IX piece, that it's about the financial investment, but it's also the access to fields of play, it's access to locker rooms, it's access to restrooms, it's access to better times for use of different spaces. And that just reminds me about the Build BPS conversation that sort of is everlasting and ever going, which is good because we need to continue to focus on that. But that our fields and our athletic facilities, indoor and outdoor, should be also a part of that Build BPS conversation, and in partnership certainly with the parks where the school department doesn't own or have sort of ownership of that property. So I'm not sure if there's anything else to add on that point, but I'm a strong believer in athletic programming across the board for our student athletes, both male and female sports and co-ed sports where it applies, and think academically in a different way. That's the bells and whistles there on me.
Thank you so much, Councillor Savi George. Okay, next up is Councillor Braden, and then it'll be Councillor Mejia. Councillor Braden.
Thank you. I echo Councillor Sabi George's support for student athletes and anything we can do to increase participation. I think it's like you develop lifelong habits, and it's really important to continue to support student athletes. I had another question that's more local in terms of our a local question with regard to cultivating trust and good communication. I really am concerned that we do a good job in communicating with the families around the Jackson man and the Horace man transition. And I don't know, I know we're in the middle of this huge crisis at the moment, and everyone's scrambling to manage all sorts of other issues. But I don't know, is there anything in the works in terms of to pick up that conversation again now as we move forward?
Yes, we did a survey, and so we're really anxious to get the results of the survey out to the community and get this restarted again. And it's really important to have the community stakeholder engagement, especially as we talk about cultivating trust. And so we're hoping to get that started. Of course, we're just, got thrown a doozy here with the pandemic, and so try to get back on course. Nate, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I was just gonna say, you named the survey. I think we've also been, Sam DePina has been talking with the Jackson Man community on a more frequent basis. I think it may even has been at least once a month, maybe twice a month. We're continuing to work with the Horace Man and communicate. I think during COVID, I think there's been a lot of communication to families. So we're just trying to sequence when's the right time for us to re-engage. Those are conversations that are ongoing, and having different conversations with different members of the community. I was actually in touch with Maritza Siliberto over the weekend about the Horace Man. So these are ongoing. I think what we need to do is figure out what's the right timing for more public conversations around Build BPS for all of the topics that have been brought up. Very good.
Yeah, I get calls, so I'm very committed to see if we can get the best possible outcome on those. So, and it's also because the community center is part of that whole process, that whole facility. The stakeholders are not just parents of school kids in BPS. There's a broader community that is a stakeholder in that facility as well. So I hope we can have a broad-ranging conversation going forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Braden. Next up, Councillor Mejia, and then it'll be Council President Janey. Councillor Mejia.
Hi, yes. So I do have a question following up on the surveys. Every year we fill out these surveys. We get feedback from students and parents about what is working and what is not so much so working, and what we could do. I know that I was a part of an initiative that worked with Monica Roberts and her team on redesigning the survey, where we included 9 questions that were designed specifically by parents through an organization that I used to run called C-Plan. And there was a desire to figure out how is that information being shared with parents. The one thing is to get the information. The other is, how are we disseminating the results, the findings of those results, and how are we using those findings to help us figure out what we can do differently on the individual school level. So I'm just curious, what, if any, feedback you have about, feedback about that survey process, and whether or not there is an appetite to actually be more action oriented with what we're learning, specifically around school culture and climate, issues of safety, and cultural competency were the top 3 issues that we really wanted to focus on. So just curious about, one thing is getting the data, the other is what we do with that data and how families are being informed. I also wanted to follow up on President Council Janey's question around procurement, specifically for minority and women business owned. It's not just around food. I asked about training, but what other opportunities exist within BPS to help support minority vendors? I'm really curious about what efforts are being made. I know, Nate, you had talked about matching up with the city goals, but I'm just wondering through BPS partnerships, what other opportunities exist to think outside the box, even if it's just entrepreneurs or smaller organizations. And I'm curious about Commitment 5 priorities. Following up on Councilor Campbell's questions, one of the priorities is to provide additional social workers and parent liaisons. What has that decision process look like? How are we going to utilize our workforce diversity goals in the hiring of these workers? In regards to retention, how are we specifically going about hiring and maintaining teachers of color other than teachers who reflect their student body? How are things other than race or gender been taken into account in the hiring process, such as language competency and sexual orientation? And then in regards to food and nutrition service, David mentioned that we are working with local minority and veteran-owned businesses. Can we go further into detail about what that looks like? What businesses are we working with? What percentage of our meals are being made by these businesses? What is the future relationship of Revolution Foods? Besides vegetarian options, how are specific dietary accommodations being met for our schools? That's a lot. And you all got like 5 minutes, so go.
Well, we'll do our best here. So the first one is surveys. So we did put on hold the family survey this spring because obviously families are really struggling, and we had just done a big survey from them where we got almost 45% of respondents, which is actually really good to get almost half of the parents responding. So we did put that on hold right now, and I do anticipate doing another survey of parents, and it'll probably be another way to look at, kind of our COVID response and where we're at in terms of the school community and the environment. Obviously, we're not in school and the environment, so surveying families is really, really a critical way for us to get feedback. As for the social workers, liaisons, and all of the support positions we're putting in, we did make the calculated choice to create high quality schools across all of our district. We wanted to start with our low performing schools first. So part of those position and lining those positions has been to put them in the 33 lowest performing schools in this first year's budget, with the hope to be able to continue to expand those support positions later. We have considered language by having some of our family liaisons, with a preference for languages to serve their community for those families, family liaisons that we have. And then also, I think we just recently through our hiring process, and I don't know if Nate or David have more information on this, or if there's someone from our human capital online, but about looking at language when we're in the interview process and how do we assess for that. I think we have a new process for that. I didn't get a full in-depth briefing on that, but I have heard that we are working on that. I'll let Nate talk about the procurement pieces.
Thank you.
Yeah, as I mentioned to Councilor Janey or President Janey, I would love more ideas to think outside the box. If you have suggestions, please send them over. I think part of what we do as part of our standard practice is to make sure we're doing better outreach in terms of RFPs and invitations for bid to make sure that they're more public. We're moving all of the bid process online to make sure that we can lower the bar for participation, make sure it's easier to participate, particularly during COVID. And I believe there's also the opportunity that there are nominal fees to pay for the processing of RFPs. We also have fee waiver forms for people to be able to encourage them to bid. But please submit.
You have to pay to bid?
There are bid processing costs, yeah, to be able to pay for postage and printing and stuff like that. So that's another thing that we've been looking at. I would say just we would love more suggestions in terms of the Revolution Foods bid and food nutrition services. That the food service contract is out to bid right now, so I can't speak to the future of Revolution Foods. We're in the process of reviewing all the bids. I will say, just in terms of your question on health needs and restrictions, one of the capital investments that we're making for FY21 is an investment in a new point of sale system. This is the little computer screen that the food service workers use to sort of monitor how much food they're using in every day and understand what sort of, it's a sales system, but obviously with universal free lunch, there's no actual transactions. What that will allow for us to do is better monitor each individual student's health restrictions and needs. It's a much safer way to ensure that we're monitoring all students for allergies and all of the things that our food service workers are doing now, but we're getting more efficient, including all the back end better data that we're going to get for our procurement. So that is an area where we'll be able to take into account not just vegetarian, non-vegetarian, but all of the complexities around nut allergies and other food restrictions that come into play.
Yeah, and since I haven't heard the chime yet, I want to get one more question in there. Nate, I'm curious, how every year BPS has the website BPS Partnerships. So a few years ago, I hosted a fair, if you will, for small vendors. These are folks who are providing service, whether it's yoga, life skills, that there are entrepreneurs, but they just don't know how to navigate the process. So when I think about procurement and I think about creating access for folks in the community, these are people who are already deeply rooted. They just need to have a vehicle of sorts to have this opportunity to be a partner. So I would love to talk to you a little bit about how we can help support these folks. So put me on the little list of people to come up for that, okay?
That's great, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Council President Janey, and then it'll be Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you so much. I want to follow up on the procurement, and I really appreciate you seeking the opportunity for more discussion and more ideas. You should be aware that Councilor Wu and I have an open hearing order on procurement, and I think BPS certainly a big enough player in this front that you should be part of that discussion. And I imagine we will have subsequent working sessions as well. Just a quick follow-up. I would like to get very clear what the spend was for local business, women-owned businesses, and businesses owned by people of color for the budget looking back, and what the projection is in this budget for FY21. What do we expect to spend with whom? Okay, so I would like that. If you could get that to me as a follow-up, I would appreciate that. And I think it would be helpful to inform some of our other conversations. I would be interested as well in terms of follow-up on my earlier questions, some choice and demand data. Is that something that could be provided in following up? I know we have a lot of questions around student assignment, around home-based, around the transportation we spend. It would be helpful, I think, and inform our discussion if we understood what families were choosing and where the real demand is. So I would be really interested if there was a way to kind of look at the top 10 schools and in terms of choice, and then maybe the schools that are least chosen. So maybe the 10 that are least chosen, as well as how that factors in to assignment.
Can I just, on that note, our Welcome Services team does publish an annual assignment report that does include number of families registering. I can't recall off the top of my head if it includes a school by school analysis. Having looked at the data on school choice, the complexity of number of schools that are chosen based on the density of the neighborhood and available seats around is sort of, there are multiple competing factors about that. But the school choice and assignment report, which I can share the link afterwards, is a great place to start in terms of, this is the data that we already published, and I'd be interested to know what the follow-up questions you'd have around assignment would help us sort of direct that analysis.
Wonderful, and we can start with that report. That's wonderful. I know there was an earlier question around what information is shared with the BRIC, and I heard the response that the information is shared with Boston Police, and then what Boston Police does. I'm interested though in the school police and what reporting, what information is being shared, what kind of reports are they writing for which incidents, and so I am interested in that. So as we talk about school safety, I would also be very interested in a lot of the commitments under the issues under commitment number 6. So just again, thinking through the plans for summer, in terms of making up for what we're missing during school buildings being closed and students doing remote learning, you know, what the plan is for trying to make sure that those students are not. So my worry is that we're going to have 2 back-to-back kind of summer slippage, you know, with the remote learning. And thank God we have some students who are participating, and I'd like to understand more, you know, what that is. But, you know, how will we use the summer? How will we think about the fall? Even if we don't have buildings open, what more are we doing to ensure that whether it's credit, so it's not just about credit recovery, it's also about those stepping stones and building blocks that our young people need so that they can progress. And so I don't know how we assess that. I don't know how we are determining who needs summer school, who doesn't. I've heard many of us say we've got to cast the net wide. And I'd rather cast the net wide and make sure that we are including young people rather than having them kind of slip through. So if we could just speak to credit recovery, the plans for summer school, you know, the ongoing potential of remote learning and what that looks like, what the thinking is for when school buildings do open and how that will clearly be different than how they were open in the past. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Cheney. I know that will provide you the added information on the procurement questions that you had, as well as some of the spend looking forward and back. So we'll get that. And then the choice data, I heard Nate say he'll provide you the existing report and then check in and see if there's any further questions from that. And we'll see if it's available from school, but school by school, so we can get you the top 10 and the least 10, but give you also some context around that. I heard Nate say in terms of enrollment patterns and density and that sort of thing, and really what you might expect. And then in terms of summer school and summer planning, we're deep into our summer planning now for how we're going to do continuity of learning. As you know, our remote learning plan was based on 4 key things, which was have standards aligned, so we know what the prerequisite standards are. DESE gave us those Friday before May 4th, so we could really focus our efforts around what are the key essential learnings kids have to have for that progression of learning that you talked about. Then second is to assess to those standards. So we have 2 assessments required in each of the ELA and math standards during this time of closure from May 4th to the end of the school year that we're giving to students. So that will give us a better understanding of where the students are at on the standards they need to progress. We'll be using that information for summer school, as well as credit recovery and some of the kids who were not credit ready before school. Before closure, and kids who have still had difficulty engaging, either their family circumstances been difficult for them, or they're caring for their siblings, or whatever other reason is that the students are having difficulty engaging in a really high quality way. So we'll be looking at them. Already we have about 20% of our students that we have developed student success plans for. And that's where we're really going to get the information that we need in terms of the continuity of learning this summer. So there's 3 strategies this summer. One is
plan to expand beyond the 20% when you say you have those success plans.
Yeah. So it'll be offered to kids who are having difficulty on the assessment, kids who are in a tier 2 or tier 3 intervention, meaning kids who are having multiple ways of means of needing support. And then also looking at kids who are credit deficient. And then of course, the high school seniors who did not graduate. Those are really our key folks, key students we're looking at, or kids who need, support with special needs or EL or any of the other students we really focus on anyways. And then just finally, I know the bell is there, but there's 2 ways that we're looking to approach it. One is by having, more of a traditional type of summer school, but done remotely, where there's classes and kids sign up for the classes and they do more of their studies that way. But also we're looking at an innovative program where teachers will actually follow some of the students that they have and have relationships with their families and bring them up to grade level by the end of the year. And then in August, looking at a boot camp for kids who need like a kind of power support system right before school starts. So multiple layers, three key strategies this summer to try to reach more of our kids, in addition to the kind of enrichment opportunities that we typically have with the Boston After School and Beyond program.
Thank you, Superintendent. And I love that there's a variety of programs to meet the different needs, the unique needs of our students. Love to hear more about that. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to you and your team, Superintendent.
Thank you, Council President Janey. All right, next up is Councilor Edwards, and then it'll be me. And I'll just say that we're not going to do a third round unless people have a lingering question, in which case you should put up a blue hand. Councilor Edwards.
Okay, so if there's no, okay, so I just wanted to kind of bring back to the question of trying not to step too much into COVID, but in general, I do see that there's a large amount of support and an increased, I think, reliance on public-private relationships, especially now. I think it's only increased with COVID, but even before then, a lot of our schools were leveraging either their students' parents' bank accounts and their relationships and their ability to raise money, or the facts, leveraging in general where they are located, or they were able to essentially leverage and raise money where other schools could never ever match or even come close to it. And I brought this up before because I do believe that equity is key, right? And I believe that our budget is trying to be as equitable, but that could be upended by anybody writing a $500,000 check to a specific school. And so I'm curious, not just, what your response is going to be, because I expect there to be an increased amount of private dollars being poured into BPS. That they are kind of indirectly through this resiliency fund trying to help provide for the laptops and so on and so forth. But when you have that kind of fire hose of money being turned on, right? Let's just talk straight dollars. What is going to be your systemic response to make sure that that fire hose of resources, private money, is distributed equitably amongst your schools? And then also those schools that have been able to raise money and will continue to raise money and probably will raise more money. How do you make sure that that doesn't upend equity? And especially with the great plans to have, seven pioneer or great high schools, to make sure that we have this vision that I really do support, Brenda. I really think it's an incredible vision about what BPS should be and going towards. Again, a check can upend that, the ability for one school to outraise the other. And then, okay, Johnny's school raised $500,000. I'll send my kid over there versus to the local school, so it can upend it. So what's the response to, an influx of cash and the ability for schools to outraise each other?
Yeah, that has been something that has been brought to my attention since day one of becoming superintendent counselor. There's a lot of concern out there about schools who can raise money and schools who can't raise money. And then the real inequities that happen because of that. We have a couple things. One is we're working with the BEDF partners and through our Community and Parent Advancement Office. And we also have Monica Roberts, who has been working with our partnership office. We just hired a new partnership person to help us with some of these equity around partnerships. The next is really to address fundraising. We addressed it this during COVID by just saying, and we put a moratorium on fundraising actually, and said that any folks who want to provide additional resources to BPS students need to go through the resiliency fund. The only caveat to that is that we can't restrict fundraising for 501c3s or independent schools who have these independent organizations. So that presents a slight challenge to the overall fundraising strategy. But this is something that has been on my mind and something that I want to tackle with our BEDF partners and our development office.
So one of the things that we did, and I recognize, I'm not dismissing that that's an issue, right? If someone established the Friends of the Lydia Edwards Elementary School as a 501c3, right? And they choose to raise whatever monies for the Lydia Edwards Elementary School, right? That is
that nonprofit that BPS has no control over, is my understanding of what you're saying, right?
Right.
But in as much as BPS schools are accepting funds or resources, one of the issues we had was there was no transparency about it. We actually didn't know what each school was raising or bringing in. Is that something that you could do to say, we want to know how much money you got in from private dollars this year and in what form? Because I don't think we have those reports.
Yeah, Nate, can you speak to what we are able to collect?
I do know that we have the purview to be able to ask anyone who's accepting funds on behalf of our schools to be able to provide us with a report, something that I'm working with Margaret Farmer and the engagement team to get a better understanding of. I think we're starting to look at how do we provide this sort of standard practices for reporting. We don't have it yet, but it is something that we're working on.
I do think that would be vital, actually, to have a date when that's going to be readily available, ideally by the start of this school year, where I expect a fire hose of cash to be coming even more so to our school system. And I'm not upset that people are raising money for BPS. I don't want people to hear that. I just believe so much in the vision and the push for equity, Brenda, that if at the end of the day, that kind of dollars can go, I'm not going to raise money for every school, right? If I have a parent, I'm raising it only where my kids go to school. And so that's parents don't have, and nor should they have a global vision for all BPS, right? They have the vision for their kids in their BPS school and their classmates and whatnot. And so how do we counter or at least balance? I wouldn't say counter, balance that. And I think transparency needs to happen. So, and again, I brought this up a couple of budgets ago. So we've been working on getting this information for more than just this time.
Well,
I think that's, if there's frustration you hear, it's from that.
Well, yeah, and I feel the same frustration. So, I mean, ever since I came, this has been something that I've really wanted to do. And so the vehicle we have to do that in is with BEDF and our partners, and really trying to strengthen our development arm and then create the policies to be able to have the school committee look at in terms of a more equitable distribution once we're able to collect centrally and then deploy out. And so that is a priority of mine, and it is a priority that's been put in to the strategic plan. So I hope we won't be here next year. I hope we'll have solutions ready to go. And I know that there is urgency with the immediacy of the pandemic and what might come about in terms of folks wanting to provide additional support to schools. But we'll keep our eye on that.
Thank you.
Grants, just so you know, grants do also have to be, formal grants need to go before the school committee, so we can get you a list of those at least by school.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Nate, I wondered, I know you can't comment on the ongoing RFP process for the food services, but I am interested in how we might have rewritten that RFP in light of the way in which food service in our schools has been changing. And obviously that would affect kind of respondents. So I'd love to just hear a little bit about that.
So one of the things that has been shifting over the last few years is the shift towards My Way Cafe. I can say just in terms of the one of the efforts that the food services team has done around smaller companies or minority and women-owned businesses is to encourage them to team together to respond to the RFP. This is one of the ways that they're putting a heavy focus on local sourced goods. The other thing that's happened in terms of COVID and food services is that we have relied more heavily on the prepackaged meals because we don't have our cafeterias open and packaging. And so that has shifted both the cost and which vendors we're relying on more heavily. That's requiring us to adapt a little bit of existing contracts to make sure that we have the appropriate contracts in place going into the fall if we need that flexibility to continue to provide the prepackaged meals as opposed to cafeteria meals. these are all things that are being considered. Laura Benavides, Sam DePina, and the entire food services team have been really unbelievable in terms of adapting and then being creative in the way they're thinking about different options for summer and fall.
Okay, great. And we're doing that on a short enough time scale, just because it strikes me. I know sometimes we do these multi-year contracts, but it seems as though we might have a year ahead in which we need more prepared meals than we normally would. But then as soon as we were not in that situation, we would want to be back to where we had been tacking more in the direction of fresh food that gets assembled. So that kind of flexibility is getting built in.
Yeah, that's all part of all of our contracts are sort of the not to exceed amount. So that allows us to sort of dial back in any one area if we have room on the contract. But I think, this doesn't just apply to food services. I think it applies in a number of different areas, PPEs, cleaning, all of these things that we're having sort of higher than anticipated costs. We're needing to be flexible. Our teams have been working pretty closely together to be able to sort of be sort of nimble in the fall. That's not a word that's normally applied to us, so it's we're working on it.
Well, and then I have another RFP question in the space of transportation. I know that we have for several years, I think, been just doing 1-year extensions of our contract with TransDev. And I'm curious, is that our intent for the year ahead, and have we signed that yet? Because it sure seems to me like the question of exactly what our transportation requirements will be next year is very up in the air. So I'm sort of curious in the immediate sense about where we are on that contract for next school year. And then curious more generally, I mean, it just seems to me related to the analysis that's happening and all the concern about BPS transportation that I would want to see that all reflected in maybe an updated RFP that allows us to get some better cost savings and have things that are a little more fit to our purpose in certain ways. So I would love to hear both the short term and long term, how you're thinking about transportation contracting.
So we do anticipate that TransDev is going to be our contractor for next year. I don't think we've signed the contract. It has to be signed by June 30, I believe. And so we will be signing that for the next year. However, we will be rewriting it and putting in some performance metrics for better service and better efficiencies.
I guess, well, I mean, this sort of is a question that bleeds into the afternoon, but I mean, in a situation in which we weren't making use of transportation in the same way for the first month of the fall. I mean, I guess I'm wondering about, there's two questions here. One is about how to track performance, and another is how to deal with a radically re-envisioned service potentially next year.
Yep, those are the good questions.
I'm very aware, having come from a large public agency myself, of the fact that like your power to customize is very much like it's in your hands before you sign, much more than after. So
yes, I mean, we're working on all of those recommendations now. Of course, obviously with COVID, there is a lot of adjustments that are going to be made, but we own our buses, and we have a transportation staff here that also manages a number of the key pieces, and TransDev manages our employees, our bus drivers, and then also manages the bus yards. And so we are putting in and already working with them actually on a number of things around cleaning buses and on-time delivery and improvements of services and technology implementation. We piloted a program this past spring. So there's a number of things that we've already been working with them on.
Mm-hmm.
We just need to get it codified in the writing and actually sign the contract. And I think that's in our legal office now.
Okay. Yeah. I would just urge the department. I'm sure, you're already thinking about it, but just to build as much flexibility on the public side as we can. But, and then I guess last quick question from me. I mean, I definitely echo Councillor Edwards' concern about the partnerships and just making sure that we're building equity into that vision too. I also wonder, and I think Superintendent, you may have said something on this that I sort of missed, but just in terms of like mapping, so there's the question of how much money is coming in through private fundraising. There's also just the question of kind of mapping the partnership landscape that we have. And it's something that I thought about a lot, actually, because people sometimes, as a city councilor, people ask me, people who are private actors running programs say, oh, let us know if like there are any schools that should do this. And I just find myself thinking, well, that's definitely not how this should get sorted out. So, and yet I think very often kind of personal relationships and connections are how partnerships come to our schools. And so I just wonder, and I think it probably means that we've got schools that could really use a certain type of programming and aren't getting it, and then ones where it's not really what we need. So I just wonder how you're mapping that landscape and how you're thinking about helping to form that landscape.
Yeah, so that is also a goal within the strategic plan, to have the asset mapping, and public doesn't really understand that kind of key term, but really it is looking at the assets of the community, all the resources that are out in the community, the partners, the community-based partners, the health access partners, the food shelves, all of that's available, and then making sure that schools actually have it and being very intentional where there is gaps, that we're able to fill those gaps. And so part of that is our new Margaret Farmer is our new partnership guru for the district, and she's works with Monica Roberts, and we've been developing those tools actively now.
I would just also put in a plug for Partner BPS. Let me make sure I have that address right. partnerbps.org, which is where partners can both register, and you can also see what partners are working with what schools. We also have a dashboard on the dashboard.cityofboston.gov that shows a lot of information about our partners, what categories they're working in, what schools are working with. So it's another area for you to dive into and see what information we're already collecting around our partners.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll definitely make use of that. I think those are my questions. And now I'm just going to go to Councillor Asabi George, our education chair, who I think has another follow-up. And then colleagues, unless I see your blue hand go up, we're going to wrap up this session. So Councillor Asabi George.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, and thank you everyone for sticking it out. I know we have part 2 this afternoon. Couple of questions around school safety, something that I've been working on since I joined the council, and it's certainly more than just about the most immediate response to COVID and the school cleanliness and preparing hopefully for reopening of schools in September. But I'm also curious just about school safety more globally, thinking about the locks on the door, thinking about preparing for worst case scenarios around violence in our schools, making sure that school redesign, especially through any significant renovations, is thoughtful about school safety and how visitors are entering our buildings. But then it's also, and I think Councilor Mejia mentioned this in her comments, it's about making sure that kids coming and going to school, however they come, whether it's by school bus, whether it's by walking, whether it's by being driven by a family member, that experience is safe. And then that conversation there extends to, potentially improperly discarded needles in our schoolyards and our playgrounds. So school safety to me just is, in a broad sense, is really important. But as a former teacher, the violence in schools is of particular concern to me, and making sure that although we are currently dealing with the pandemic and the system's response to the pandemic, which we'll talk about in the afternoon session, that schools are, and school design and protocols are in place to make sure that schools are safe places. So that's question number 1. I'll get to my other 2 questions before I get an answer, please. Age 22 concerns. We've got a number of students. I'm curious what that number is of kids that are 21. How many of them will be hitting age 22 in the next school year that we need to really double down some of our specific efforts to make sure we can get them to graduation and get them to appropriate transitions into college, career, and workforce? And what about age 22 kids now, or when I say age 22 kids that are about to turn 22 during this time while we're sort of disengaged from face-to-face learning and kids are doing school from home? How are we supporting them? And then on some of the partnership pieces, I'm a big proponent of Katie's Closet and the work that they've been doing, especially sort of in normal times, to support our families experiencing homelessness and some other issues related to poverty for sure. But then now sort of applaud their efforts in stepping up during this current time. But really would like to see them grow across the district, think that the services they provide are really helpful to so many of our families, in addition to our families experiencing homelessness. So that's age 22, Katie's Closet in particular around partnerships, and then school safety. And that will be it for me this morning, Madam Chair.
Well, I will share your excitement for Katie's Closet and the incredible work that they do in our schools and what wonderful partners they are. As you know, during our food distribution, they quickly ramped up and started delivering products, hygiene products to us. And it's just been wonderful to have them as a partner. As for age 22, I'll have to get back to you. I do have, this was brought to my attention last week. I just haven't had a chance to recircle with the special ed team on the specific strategies. So I'll bring that back to you because it's a concern of mine as well. And then school safety, I plan on speaking tomorrow at school committee about school safety and launching a stakeholder task force around not only our privacy and data sharing policy, but overall, just what are we thinking in terms of the health and safety of our students as we think about high school redesign and you know, visitors at the elementary school, as you talked about, and just how do we think very differently about our campuses so that we have a comprehensive plan for school safety in the future. So be addressing that in the stakeholder group. Would love to have your participation in that.
I appreciate that, and please count me in.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Sabi George. Superintendent, forgive me, I had one really quick question that I had forgotten about, which is, have we considered extending, my understanding is that we basically buy the T-passes for the young people as a kind of block, like a sort of here's per student block. And I wonder if we have considered extending that into July and August for our young people, which I would
Yes,
love.
I actually worked on that prior to COVID because one of the things I wanted to do and notice last year was that I didn't think that there were enough students who were at risk of being retained, actually accessing opportunities as for summer learning. And also I wanted to work with Boston After School and Beyond in a very meaningful way to get more kids engaging with Boston After School and Beyond. Part of that was looking at summer T-passes as part of an incentive program. And our youth cabinet has been working on some of those proposals for an incentive program. You're hearing it first here. So it's very exciting opportunities to partner with our MBTA partners. And so we were looking at that. I just don't know what the possibility will be with COVID in terms of their schedules that they'll be running this summer. What does that look like? You know, we are in conversations with them now, but again, we're all planning for this as this evolves for, you know, number of people that can be gathered together, you know, cleaning and transporting youth and transporting adults. And so we're having those conversations right now on what that would look like.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, I just think in general, I mean, I think an incentive program is a great idea. I think in general with young people, the more you can just lower the barriers to transportation.
Absolutely.
And ideally it would just be the same card that you've got, just works all year round. And since we're really talking about 2 months of July and August, it just seems to me like something that we and the MBTA could get together.
Yeah, agreed.
But great. All right. Well, seeing no more blue hands, and I don't see anyone in line for public testimony, I will remind those watching at home that we have a dedicated public testimony hearing this evening at 6 p.m. on the BPS budget. So I'd welcome folks to show up there. You're also welcome to testify at the 1 p.m. hearing we're going to be having relatively shortly after a luxurious 40-minute break on COVID and BPS's planning in light of that. So without further ado, I'm adjourning this meeting of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone. See you shortly.
See you soon.